Boston's winter didn't arrive with gentleness. It struck like a force determined to break anyone caught outside. The streets were glazed with ice, the wind slicing between buildings, carrying with it a bite that seemed almost merciless. On a forgotten bench along Tremont Street, a woman sat with her body curved protectively around two children. Her coat was worn thin, fabric frayed at the sleeves, but she held them as though she could lock the cold out with sheer will. The little ones, their breaths visible in faint puffs, pressed their faces against her chest. They were asleep, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, exhausted surrender of bodies too tired to fight hunger and frost. Clara Evans drew her arms tighter around them. Once, she had stood in warm rooms where chandeliers glittered and wine was poured into crystal glasses. Now she sat on steel hardened by frost, every muscle aching with the weight of choices she never wanted to make. Her phone buzzed weakly in her hand, the battery icon barely holding on. Pride told her not to reach out. Pride reminded her of the stares, the whispers, the sting of being cast aside. But hunger whispered louder, and cold demanded action. With numb fingers, she typed a message. "Can we stay with you tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing." She pressed send. What Clara didn't notice was that one digit had slipped when her thumb hit the screen. The message traveled, but not to the friend she meant to reach. 4 blocks away, high above the snow-lashed city, the glass walls of a tower gleamed. Inside, a man in a tailored coat stepped from a late meeting, his mind heavy with figures and contracts. His phone vibrated. Expecting a business update, he glanced down. What he read froze him in place. "Can we stay with you tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing." The name flashing across the screen, Clara. The same Clara who had disappeared 6 years ago without a word. He had once sworn forever to her. Now he was about to see what forever had done without him. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more powerful life stories. And tell me in the comments, what country are you watching from? I'd love to know where my viewers are tuning in. The car door opened. His driver waited. The address attached to the message pointed to Tremont Street. Ethan gave one order. To Tremont, now. The bench was waiting. So was she. The text arrived just after midnight. Ethan had left a tense strategy session and was walking the hushed corridors of his company's headquarters when his phone buzzed. He expected an update from Tokyo, another late-night contract that couldn't wait. Instead, his screen lit with words that stopped him in place. "Can we stay with you tonight? Just until morning. The kids are freezing." Beneath it, a location pin glowed. Tremont Street. But it wasn't the message that froze him, it was the name above it. Clara. 6 years collapsed into one instant. He remembered the curve of her smile, the warmth of her laugh, the way her hand fit in his as if it belonged there. He remembered a night in Cambridge when she whispered, "Forever," and he had believed it. He remembered introducing her to his family, the sharp glances over wine glasses, the silences heavy with judgment, and he remembered the day she vanished without a word. One morning she was there, the next she was gone. No note, no explanation, nothing but absence. He had searched, called, begged for answers. His mother said, "She wasn't right for you." His uncle had sneered, "You dodged a disaster." Ethan buried the hurt under work, under ambition, until eventually the empire grew so large it left little space for ghosts. Yet here her name was, glowing on his screen, attached to a plea that cut through every wall he had built. "Sir?" his driver asked, startled by his sudden stillness. Ethan's voice was sharp. "Tremont Street, now." As the car sped through the city, memories pressed against him like weights he couldn't shake. He thought of the years between them, how he had risen into boardrooms lined with glass while she somehow had fallen into silence. He thought of the divide that had always been there, widened by race, sharpened by privilege. He had power, she had been told she didn't belong in that world. And when she disappeared, he hadn't fought hard enough to stop it. The streets narrowed as they left the polished heart of the city. The glass towers gave way to brick walls streaked with grime, the kind of place his family dismissed as dangerous, though it was merely unseen by them. Tremont Street appeared under the faint buzz of a broken streetlight, and then he saw her. Clara sat on a bench, her body curled protectively around 2 small children. A thin blanket wrapped them together, but the frost still clung to their clothes. Their small heads rested against her chest, their breaths shallow with the heaviness of exhaustion. Ethan's throat tightened. For 6 years he had imagined finding her again. At a cafe, at an airport, in a chance crossing where explanations would pour out and forgiveness might follow. Never like this. Not with her huddled against the cold, holding children he didn't even know existed. The car slowed, headlights spilling across the pavement. Ethan's hand tightened on the door handle. He could have stayed inside, shielded by leather seats and tinted glass, safe in his world of power. But he knew if he did, he would never forgive himself. The door opened, the night air cutting across his face. He stepped onto the frozen grit, each step bringing him closer to the truth. She looked up at the sound of his shoes on ice. For a heartbeat, her eyes widened. Shock, fear, defiance all tangled together. The silence stretched, the years collapsing into a single breath. Ethan's gaze shifted from Clara to the children pressed against her. Their lips were pale, their coats too thin for the night. His chest tightened, anger and regret rising in equal measure. "Are they warm enough?" he asked quietly. Her reply was clipped, her pride sharp as glass. "We'll manage. You should go." But he didn't move, because one message, one name, had dragged him back to her, and he wasn't leaving without an answer. The car stopped before the driver could pull fully to the curb. Ethan pushed the door open, the sting of the winter air cutting across his face as he stepped onto the frozen grit. The yellow glow of the street lamp spilled over the bench, outlining the fragile shape of a woman huddled against the night. For a moment, he thought his eyes were deceiving him. 6 years had passed, yet the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, it was Clara. Her gaze lifted, startled by the sudden crunch of polished leather shoes on ice. Their eyes locked, and time folded in on itself. For him, it was the echo of a promise that had once defined his future. For her, it was the reminder of a past that had stripped her bare. Ethan's stare flicked downward. 2 small heads rested against her chest, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The children's skin was dulled by cold, their lips faintly pale. He swallowed hard, his voice low but firm. "Are they warm enough?" Clara adjusted the blanket, her jaw tight. "We'll manage. You should go." The words were a shield, and he knew it. Pride wasn't new to Clara. She had carried it like armor, even when she had nothing else. He took a step closer, ignoring the bite of the wind. "Let me help, just for tonight." Her mouth opened, ready to refuse, but before she could, the little girl stirred. A thin cough rasped through the night air, sharp enough to slice through Clara's defiance. Ethan saw it in her face, the flicker of panic only a mother knows. Her shoulders dropped. "Just for tonight," she whispered. The drive back was cloaked in silence. Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the twins, smoothing hair from their faces, murmuring soft words meant to anchor them. Ethan sat rigid on the other side, his thoughts a storm he didn't dare let spill. The hum of the car heater warmed the air, but the chill between them held steady. At the secondary penthouse, Ethan keyed open the door and stood aside. Clara stepped inside cautiously, her gaze scanning the space, not for its marble floors or leather furnishings, but for its safety. "Guest rooms are down the hall," Ethan said quietly. "It's warmer there." Clara's lips pressed into a line. She nodded once, her voice clipped. "Thank you. Just for tonight." He repeated the phrase back to her, the weight of it heavier than she knew. Inside, the room was spacious, yet restrained. Neutral tones, soft lamps, and the steady hum of central heating. Clara lowered her daughter onto the sofa and helped her son out of his stiff boots. The boy clung to her sleeve, his eyes wide, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Ethan lingered near the doorway, his chest tight with the sight. This wasn't how he had imagined seeing her again. Not like this, tired, hollow-eyed, holding on to 2 lives that depended on her alone. "There are towels in the bathroom," Ethan said, his voice measured. "I'll have some food sent up." Clara didn't look at him. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity," he replied. "It's a meal." The knock came minutes later, room service. Trays of steaming soup, warm bread, and mugs of hot cocoa. The children's eyes brightened, hands reaching eagerly. Clara's voice cut in, soft but firm. "Eat slowly." Yet even as she said it, her own eyes betrayed gratitude she refused to speak aloud. Ethan watched from the table, pretending to busy himself with his phone, but his focus kept slipping back to the way Clara stroked her daughter's hair, the way her son leaned against her arm. He remembered those same eyes, once turned toward him with trust. When the children finished, Clara pulled a blanket over them on the sofa. They curled together, breaths evening into sleep. "You can take the bedroom," Ethan offered. "It's warmer." Her reply came without hesitation. "We'll stay here." The silence that followed was thick but unbroken. He gave a single nod and stepped away. As he reached the doorway, he heard her voice, barely audible, meant more for herself than for him. Good night. For the first time in years, they were under the same roof. Pride and shame lingered in the air, but so did something else, something neither dared name. The morning light stretched across the penthouse windows, spilling pale streaks across polished floors. Clara stirred on the sofa, a blanket draped around her shoulders. Her son was awake, cross-legged on the rug with a picture book open in his lap, while her daughter still slept with her small hand curled tight against Clara's arm. From the kitchen came the faint sound of movement. Ethan, sleeves rolled to his forearms, set plates on the counter, scrambled eggs, toast, and a pot of coffee that filled the air with warmth. He turned as Clara sat up, her hair falling loosely around her face. "There's breakfast," he said simply. Clara hesitated, then rose, guiding the children toward the table. The boy eyed the food with open hunger, his hand twitching before Clara gently reminded him to wait. Ethan watched quietly as she placed toast on each plate first, ensuring her children ate before she touched anything herself. For a moment, the silence wasn't heavy. The twins giggled softly when the boy made a face at the eggs, and Clara's lips curved just slightly, her first unguarded smile since stepping into the penthouse. Ethan noticed. It was a glimpse of the woman he had once known, the woman whose laughter had filled rooms his family tried to empty of joy. After breakfast, Ethan glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting later. Before that, let me take him to a doctor." The cough? Clara's body tensed instantly. "No, we'll be fine." Her son coughed again, the thin, dry rasp undercutting her protest. Ethan's tone stayed calm, but it carried weight. "It's not up for debate. They need to be seen." An hour later, the four of them walked into a clinic. The nurse greeted them with a professional smile, then crouched slightly to the children's level. "We'll take good care of you," she said warmly before leading them back. She handed Ethan a clipboard. "Dad, you can fill this out." The word hung in the air like a spark catching dry kindling. Clara's head snapped toward Ethan. For a second he froze, the pen hovering above the paper. Then, without hesitation, he wrote his name in the line marked parent or guardian. Clara's stomach nodded. Watching his signature spread across the form sent a chill through her chest. She remembered the last time his family's name had been written beside hers. It hadn't been a form of safety then, it had been the beginning of exile. The nurse walked away, oblivious to the storm rising between them. Clara's eyes burned into Ethan. "Why would you write that?" "Because it's the truth," he replied, steady but quiet. She turned away, her arms folding around herself. The truth was dangerous. It had been 6 years ago, and it still was now. She could hear the voices as if they were in the room, Ethan's uncle calling her unsuitable, his mother describing her as temporary. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because of who she was. Black, working class, from a part of the city they called by its distance from theirs. She remembered the warnings whispered in corners of elegant halls, that Ethan's future had no space for her. She remembered the pressure that grew heavier with every glance from his family, every invitation rescinded, every door that closed, until she had none left to open. When she fled, it wasn't because she stopped loving him. It was because their hatred had left her no choice. Ethan studied her as she tightened her arms around her frame, her eyes locked on the clinic floor. He recognized the distance in her posture, the secrets pressing against her chest. There was more to her disappearance than silence or pride. Someone had forced her hand. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Not yet. The pediatrician stepped into the room, stethoscope in hand, her calm presence pulling Clara out of her thoughts. She examined the boy, listening carefully to his lungs before offering reassurance. "A mild infection. With rest and medication, he'll be fine." Clara exhaled, relief softening her expression. Ethan caught the look, that fragile balance of strength and exhaustion, and he knew this wasn't just about survival. Something deeper had driven her into the shadows. As they left the clinic, the snow crunched beneath their shoes. Ethan walked half a step behind her, watching the way she held her children close. His gut told him the truth was near, hidden behind walls she had built out of fear and memory. And he was determined to break through them. The ride back from the clinic was marked by silence, though it wasn't empty. Clara's thoughts churned beneath her calm expression, every breath measured, every glance at Ethan clipped. He kept his eyes forward, jaw set, but his mind was elsewhere entirely. The nurse's slip, the word "dad," still echoed. Seeing Clara's fear at something as simple as his name on a form had struck him. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting those children from something, or someone, with power sharp enough to wound her even after all these years. That night, after the twins were tucked into the guest room and Clara sat reading quietly in the corner, Ethan stepped into his study. He closed the door, pulled out his phone, and dialed. "I need everything you can find on Clara Evans," he said in a low voice. "Addresses, employment, legal records, anything from the last 6 years. Start tonight." There was a pause on the line. "That's sensitive," his contact replied. "Do it," Ethan cut in, "and keep it off the record." He ended the call and stood at the window, staring out over Boston's skyline. Glass towers rose like monuments, symbols of wealth and control. His family had always prided themselves on control, especially his uncle Richard. And suddenly, Ethan realized he'd never truly asked why Clara left. He'd simply believed the silence. That mistake had cost him 6 years with her. By morning, he forced himself back into the rhythm of routine. Clara was at the table, coaxing her son to sip warm tea while her daughter hummed to herself. For the first time, the penthouse felt lived in. Yet Clara's posture hadn't softened. She remained guarded, ready to leave at any moment. Later that day, Ethan suggested the aquarium. The twins' eyes lit up at the idea, and Clara, though wary, agreed. The city streets passed by in streaks of slush and ice as the car rolled toward the waterfront. Inside, blue light washed over them from towering glass tanks. The children pressed their palms against the glass, chasing the drift of jellyfish. Their laughter echoed through the exhibit halls, filling spaces that had been designed for quiet observation. Clara followed close, smoothing her daughter's scarf, warning her son not to run. Ethan hung back a step, watching them. For a moment, the years folded away. It was almost like walking beside her again, almost like the life they might have had. But Clara felt the weight of his gaze and stopped short. "Don't look at me like that." Ethan's brow lifted. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to remember who I was. That woman doesn't exist anymore." His reply was soft. "I don't believe that." She turned away, guiding her children toward the next tank. Ethan didn't press. He knew pushing would only drive her further behind the wall she'd built. As the twins marveled at a school of brightly colored fish, Ethan's phone buzzed. He slipped away to answer. "We've traced 6 years of records," the voice on the other end reported. "Frequent relocations, no stable employment, but here's the key. Several landlords linked to holdings owned by Richard Cole." Ethan's grip tightened. "My uncle?" "Not just ownership, interventions, payments made to employers she worked for, medical notes flagged with his signature. She didn't just disappear, she was erased." The line went dead. Ethan stood frozen in the dim glow of the exhibit, fury rising like a tide he could barely contain. His uncle had orchestrated this, had pushed Clara out of his life, had driven her into poverty, had kept the truth buried. When he returned, Clara noticed the shift in his expression. "What?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he said, too quickly. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering. "You're looking for answers. Don't." He met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I already found some." Clara's lips parted, then closed. She looked away, brushing her daughter's hair from her forehead. The children were laughing again, pointing at a turtle gliding past. To them, it was a day of wonder. To her, it was a reminder that safety was temporary. To Ethan, it was confirmation. He would no longer accept silence. The ghosts between them had names, and Richard's was first. The call came 2 days after the aquarium visit. Clara was folding laundry in the guest room, small sweaters and socks Ethan had bought for the twins, when the penthouse phone rang. At first she hesitated. Hardly anyone had that number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Clara Evans," a smooth voice said, low and deliberate. "We finally speak again." Her chest tightened. It was Richard. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone sharper than she felt inside. "To remind you that your presence in Boston is temporary," he replied, every word laced with disdain. "Leave now, quietly, and perhaps the children won't be dragged through what's coming. Stay, and I will strip from you what little you think you have." Clara's grip on the receiver tightened. "You already stripped everything once. You won't do it again." Richard chuckled, the sound hollow. "You underestimate me. I have resources you cannot imagine. Ask yourself, can you protect them from me?" The line went dead. Clara stood frozen, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. Her hands shook as she replaced the receiver. She turned, only to see her daughter standing in the doorway watching her. Clara forced a smile, but inside her heart was pounding. That evening, Ethan returned to find her standing by the window, arms wrapped tight around herself. He sensed it immediately. What happened? Her silence was heavy. Finally, she whispered, "Richard called." Ethan's jaw set. What did he say? That I should leave. That he'll come for the children. Ethan's face hardened. He had seen ruthless boardroom tactics, but this was different. This was personal, targeted, fueled by prejudice that had once pushed Clara to the margins. Then it started, he said coldly. And I'm not letting him win this time. Clara's throat tightened. You don't understand what he can do. 6 years ago, he bought doctors, he bought employers, he destroyed every step I tried to take. He'll do worse now. Ethan moved closer, his voice low but fierce. 6 years ago, I didn't know. This time I do, and I won't stand by while he threatens you, or them. Her eyes flickered with fear and something deeper, conflict. She had survived by running, by staying invisible. The idea of staying, of fighting, made her tremble. She whispered, almost to herself, "Do I let you fight for us, or do I walk away again?" Ethan caught the words. His reply was immediate. "You don't walk away, not this time." But Clara wasn't convinced. That night after the twins were asleep, she lay awake on the sofa, staring at the ceiling. Memories pressed in. The humiliation of losing job after job, the sting of being called unfit, the way doors had closed in her face, not because of who she was as a mother, but because of what she represented to Ethan's family. Black, working class, a woman they deemed unworthy. She remembered the shame of leaving without explanation, thinking it was the only way to protect her children. Now Richard was back, stronger, angrier, with even more to lose. Panic swelled inside her chest. She wanted to believe Ethan's promises, but promises had no shield against the system Richard controlled. Ethan, pacing in his study, had already made up his mind. He called Marissa, his lawyer, instructing her to prepare for a fight. "Gather everything," he told her. "Every payment, every falsified note, every thread that leads back to him. I want it ready." "Are you prepared for the cost?" she asked. "I'm prepared for war," he said flatly. In the darkness of the penthouse, two choices wrestled for dominance. Clara's instinct to run, Ethan's vow to stand. Neither knew yet which would win. But both knew one truth. Richard had drawn the battle lines. The boardroom was built to intimidate. Walls of glass overlooked Boston's skyline. A table of polished walnut stretched nearly the length of the room, and leather chairs lined its edges like thrones for men who believed themselves untouchable. Ethan stepped inside, his suit tailored sharp, his expression unreadable. Every eye turned toward him. At the far end sat Richard Cole, his uncle, relaxed in posture but sharp in gaze. He tapped a pen against the table as though conducting an invisible orchestra. Around him, other board members shifted, sensing tension but pretending to focus on quarterly reports. Richard's smile was thin. "You've been distracted, Ethan, and distraction at your level is dangerous. He gestured vaguely with his pen. "Family situation of yours. It's a liability. The press is circling. Investors are whispering. The board needs stability, not scandal." Ethan slid into his seat at the head of the table, his hands flat on the surface. "What you call a scandal, I call a truth. And it's not going anywhere." Richard leaned forward. "Then understand the consequences. Pursue that woman and her children, and your position as CEO will not be secure. The board will not stand by while you drag the company's reputation into the gutter for..." He paused deliberately. "Someone who never belonged in our world to begin with." The air grew taut. The words weren't subtle. They dripped with the same disdain Clara had endured years earlier. A black woman wasn't fit, in Richard's eyes, to stand beside Ethan, much less raise children with his name. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "You've mistaken me for someone afraid of losing a title. I don't measure worth by the seat I occupy in this room." A murmur rippled down the table. One director cleared his throat, uneasy. Another scribbled something in a notebook without looking up. Richard's smile vanished. "You're risking everything." Ethan rose to his feet, his presence commanding even in the silence. His eyes scanned the table, meeting each member in turn. "Let me make something clear before this meeting continues. There's been speculation about my personal life. I'll end it now." He paused, then spoke the words that shifted the entire room. "I have 2 children. They are mine, and I will protect them and their mother, no matter what it costs this company or me." The sentence landed with the weight of a hammer. Whispers exploded along the table. Some members leaned back in shock, others leaned forward with sudden interest. But all eyes darted to Richard. For the first time, his composure cracked. "You would make this public?" Richard hissed, his voice low but filled with venom. "I just did," Ethan replied. The silence that followed was electric. The board members exchanged glances, calculating their own positions. Some were clearly unsettled, but others seemed almost impressed. Ethan had done what Richard never expected. He had spoken with certainty, not shame. In that instant, the narrative shifted. Where Richard saw disgrace, Ethan reframed it as legacy. No longer hidden, no longer whispered about, his children's existence was now anchored in truth, declared in the very room designed to erase them. The narrator's voice rose with quiet weight. In one sentence, Ethan turned shame into legacy. Richard shoved his chair back slightly, his knuckles white around the pen he still gripped. "You'll regret this," he spat. Ethan leaned forward, his tone cold as steel. "No. You'll regret underestimating me, and you'll regret underestimating them." The meeting dissolved into scattered conversation, directors trying to regain their footing. But the center of gravity had already shifted. Ethan had spoken the truth into the air, and it could not be pulled back down. As he left the boardroom, Richard's glare burned into his back. The battle lines were drawn, and both men knew it. But only one had something worth losing and something worth protecting. The papers arrived in a thick envelope, slid under the penthouse door by a courier who didn't bother to knock. Clara spotted it first. She bent down, her hand trembling as she unfolded the documents. At the top, bold letters glared back at her, "Petition for custody review." Her throat tightened as she flipped through the pages. Phrases leapt at her: unfit mother, unstable circumstances, children's welfare at risk. She whispered, almost to herself, "He's trying to take them." Ethan appeared from his study, his expression hardening as soon as he saw the seal at the top of the papers. He didn't need to read more than a line. "Richard." Clara sank onto the sofa, the paper sliding across her lap. "I told you," she murmured. "They would never let me stay." Within an hour, Ethan's lawyer, Marissa Grant, stood in the living room. A woman known for her sharpness in court, she flipped briskly through the documents, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. "This isn't random," Marissa said, closing the folder. "It's coordinated. They've pulled old medical notes, employment records, even fabricated testimony from landlords. Someone with deep pockets made sure this narrative stuck." Clara stared at the carpet, her fingers curling tight into her palms. She knew exactly how it had been built, because she'd lived through it. "Tell me everything," Marissa pressed gently. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. The twins played quietly in the next room, their laughter muffled through the door. That sound, so fragile, kept her from breaking entirely. Finally, she lifted her gaze. "When I was pregnant, I went to the doctor for routine checkups, nothing unusual. Then one visit, suddenly they flagged me, said I showed signs of stress, instability. I couldn't understand where it came from." Her voice faltered. "Later, I found out the doctor had ties to your family. To Richard, he paid them to write those notes." Ethan's jaw clenched. Marissa's eyes narrowed, pen poised over her notebook. Clara continued, her tone sharpening as old wounds reopened. "It didn't stop there. My employer suddenly cut my hours, said they had concerns about reliability. I was let go within weeks. Every time I applied somewhere new, my references fell apart. I couldn't hold on to anything. Richard didn't just push me out of your life, Ethan. He burned every bridge behind me." The words spilled faster now, 6 years of silence cracking open. "I left because I thought if I stayed, they'd find a way to lock me in a hospital, call me unfit before I even gave birth. I chose to disappear before they could take the babies from me. Do you understand? I didn't stop loving you. I stopped believing your world would ever allow me to exist in it." Her voice broke at the last line. Clara turned away, pressing her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. Ethan moved closer, but she recoiled, shaking her head. "Don't. Please. If Richard can get this far, he'll go further. He'll drag them through court, drag me through the mud. I can't let them live through that." The implication hung heavy in the air. She was ready to vanish again, to disappear into the shadows rather than risk her children being taken. "No," Ethan said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You're not running this time, not because of him." Clara's eyes glistened, but the fear remained etched across her face. She had spent years surviving a system designed to erase her, and now that same system had sharpened its teeth again. Marissa leaned forward. "If we want to win this, Clara, you'll need to stand up in court and tell your story. All of it. The bribed doctors, the jobs, the harassment. It will hurt, but it's the only way to dismantle his lies. Clara's silence stretched long. For the first time in years, she considered not her pride, but her children's future. Yet the thought of facing Richard's machine in public made her stomach twist. Ethan placed a hand flat on the table, his voice steady. "You won't be alone, not this time." Still, Clara's eyes drifted to the window, to the snow falling outside. It reminded her of the night she'd sat on that bench, convinced no one would come. And in that moment, the temptation to vanish again tugged at her with brutal force. The press conference was announced with only a day's notice. Yet by the time the cameras began to click, the lobby of Cole Infrastructure was packed wall to wall. Reporters jostled for position, microphones stretched forward like spears, the hum of live broadcasts carrying out to the world beyond the glass doors. Clara stood just behind the podium, her palms damp, her heart thrumming like a drum against her ribs. She hadn't stood before a crowd in years. The last time she'd been seen in public, whispers had followed her, words like unstable, unfit, not one of us. That weight had driven her into the shadows. Today, those shadows had to lift. Ethan's hand brushed lightly against hers, steadying. He gave a slight nod, then stepped aside, leaving the stage for her. The room quieted as Clara faced the lights. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She looked out over the crowd, the rows of unfamiliar faces, the flashing bulbs, the expectant silence. Then she drew a breath. "My name is Clara Evans," she began, her voice low but clear. 6 years ago, I disappeared from a life I thought was mine. I left behind a man I loved and a future I thought I could share. People asked why. Some said I wasn't stable. Some said I was unfit. None of it was true. Her voice strengthened as she went on. What was true is that I was targeted. I was told in words and actions that I didn't belong. Because of where I came from. Because of the color of my skin. Because I didn't fit the image of what a family with power wanted. So doors closed. Jobs vanished. Doctors' notes appeared with lies about my health. Every step I took, someone made sure I stumbled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed closer. Clara's chin lifted, her eyes sharp. I left because I thought it was the only way to protect my children. I carried them alone, through hunger, through nights on benches, through days when the world pretended we didn't exist. And still, they survived. Not because of charity, but because of love. Because no matter how hard it got, I refused to let go of them. Her hand rested lightly on the podium, steady now. We are not a scandal. We are not a liability. We are a family. The silence that followed was heavy, reverent. Even the clicking cameras slowed. It wasn't pity in the reporter's eyes now. It was respect. Then Ethan stepped forward, his presence commanding. He took the second microphone. "I am Ethan Cole," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and those children are mine. Clara is the woman I love. She should never have been forced into silence, never have been made invisible. Today, I stand with her, not as CEO of this company, not as someone with wealth or titles, but as a man who will not allow lies to define my family." The crowd erupted. Questions flew. Are you confirming paternity? Will you step down as CEO? What action will you take against Richard Cole? Ethan lifted a hand, quieting them with ease. Yes, they are my children. No, I will not step down. And as for Richard, truth has its own consequences. Headlines were written before the conference even ended. Clara Evans, survivor, not victim. Billionaire CEO publicly acknowledges hidden family. From poverty to podium, the woman they tried to erase. By the time Clara stepped down, her knees nearly buckled from the intensity of it all. But the applause that followed her out wasn't laced with mockery. It was genuine. Reporters shouted her name not as a scandal, but as a story of resilience. Outside the building, the cold air met her face, sharp and real. She looked down at the twins, their small hands clutching hers. For once, she didn't feel like she had to hide them. Ethan walked beside her, his shoulders squared, his voice low enough for only her to hear. They wanted shame, he said, but you gave them dignity, and the world will never forget that. For the first time in years, Clara believed him. The emergency board meeting was called at dawn. By mid-morning, the glass-walled conference room pulsed with tension. Executives shuffled papers, exchanged uneasy glances, and whispered in tones that carried more nerves than confidence. Richard Cole sat at the far end, his usual smirk firmly in place. He believed the room still belonged to him. Ethan entered without fanfare, a leather folder tucked under his arm. His expression was steady, his stride deliberate. Clara watched from the back, her presence silent but unshakable. She wasn't there as a token, She was there as the truth Richard had tried to erase. Richard leaned back, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Nephew, I assume this interruption is about your recent declaration. Bold, reckless, but entertaining." He chuckled, inviting others to share in his arrogance. None did. Ethan placed the folder on the table, opening it with calm precision. "This isn't about declarations, Richard. It's about evidence." Murmurs stirred. Ethan lifted a stack of documents, sliding them toward the directors nearest him. "Over the past 6 years, my uncle orchestrated a campaign designed to erase Clara Evans from my life. Payments to landlords to terminate her leases, bribes to physicians to falsify notes questioning her stability. Pressure applied to employers until her jobs disappeared." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Every path she tried to walk was cut off, not by chance, not by circumstance, but by deliberate sabotage. The directors leaned forward, eyes scanning the damning pages. Signatures, transfer records, correspondence marked with Richard's initials, proof stacked higher than excuses. Richard's face reddened. "You think this circus of half-truths will sway them? She's a liability, Ethan. You risk our name for a woman who doesn't belong in this world. You disgrace us all." Clara stiffened, the venom in his tones striking like it had 6 years ago. The word belong hung in the air like a slur. Ethan's voice cut cleanly through the room. "The only disgrace here is you. You didn't just target her. You targeted my children. You tried to strip them of their father before they could even speak his name. That's not protection of legacy. That's corruption." A director at the far end cleared his throat. "Is this substantiated?" Ethan gestured to the file. "Every payment is documented. Every signature is his. You don't have to take my word for it. You just have to read." The room shifted. Chairs creaked as directors whispered among themselves. Richard's bluster grew louder. "She manipulated you. You think this is love? It's weakness. She'll destroy everything this family built." Clara's eyes lifted at last. Though she hadn't been asked to speak, her voice carried clear across the room. "I didn't destroy anything. I survived everything you tried to do." The silence afterward was sharper than any gavel. The board chair tapped his pen once against the table, then set it down firmly. "We've seen enough." A motion to vote on Mr. Richard Cole's immediate removal from the board. Hands rose around the table, one after another, with barely a pause. Ethan didn't look at Richard. He kept his gaze steady on the directors, his posture resolute. Clara watched him, her chest tight. He was risking the empire he'd inherited, not for profit, not for shareholders, but for her, for their children. The final tally was read aloud. The motion carried. Richard was stripped of his position permanently. The older man stood slowly, disbelief flickering into rage. "You'll regret this, Ethan. Blood turns on blood, but it always costs more than you expect." Ethan didn't flinch. The cost of silence was already too high. Richard stormed out, his footsteps echoing against marble, a man undone by the very power he once wielded. The board turned back to Ethan, waiting for his next move, but he didn't speak to them. He turned instead toward the back of the room, toward Clara. For the first time since that night on Tremont Street, she allowed herself to hold his gaze without looking away. The man who once let her go had learned what power is for. The city felt different when they left the boardroom. Clara walked beside Ethan, the twins' small hands locked in hers, and for once she wasn't glancing over her shoulder. The weight that had pressed down on her for years had shifted. The lies, the erasure, the endless struggle to prove her worth, they had been dragged into the light. And the man who had once watched her vanish had stood tall beside her this time. Back at the penthouse, the children sprawled on the rug with puzzles and crayons scattered around them. Their laughter filled the space, soft and unguarded. Clara stood by the window, the city lights flickering across her face. Ethan approached, his voice quiet but certain. "They deserve more than borrowed nights and temporary safety," he said. "You deserve more." Clara's arms folded loosely across her chest. "And what do you think more looks like?" "A home," Ethan replied, steady. "Not a place you're afraid will be taken from you. Not a roof that depends on someone else's mercy. A future where you and the twins know you belong, permanently." She turned, studying him. The sincerity in his face was hard to deny, but memory still clung like frost. "You're asking me to step back into a world that once spat me out. Do you know what that means for me? For them?" "I do," Ethan said. "And I also know what it means if we don't. Richard's gone. The board has spoken. I'm not offering charity, Clara. I'm asking you to build with me. Not as a favor, but as a family. Her gaze softened, but her voice remained guarded. Family was the word that got us here in the first place. Then let's redefine it, Ethan countered. Not their definition. Ours. The children's laughter broke the silence. Clara looked at them, her son stacking crayons like towers, her daughter giggling at his crooked construction. Their lives had been marked by instability, by uncertainty. For the first time, she allowed herself to picture them growing without fear, to imagine birthdays not shadowed by eviction notices, winters without cold benches. Slowly, she nodded. All right, we'll try, but this time I set the terms: honesty, respect, and no more secrets. Ethan's expression eased, a quiet relief breaking through his composure. Done. No more secrets. News traveled quickly. Within weeks, Richard's downfall was splashed across every financial page. The man who once ruled with arrogance now faced bankruptcy, stripped of influence, abandoned by allies who had fed from his power but wouldn't drown with him. Clara read the headlines without satisfaction. His ruin didn't erase what he had stolen, but it ended his grip on her future. In contrast, coverage of Clara shifted entirely. The same media that once painted her as a ghost now called her a survivor, a mother of strength, a woman who had faced a system designed to erase her and refused to stay erased. People stopped her in the street, not with pity, but with admiration. At night, when the twins were asleep, Clara would sometimes sit by the window, tea in hand, watching the snow fall over Boston. Ethan often joined her, silent at first, until one evening he said, 6 years ago, I failed you. I let silence win. I won't make that mistake again. She didn't answer right away. She reached over, covering his hand with hers, a gesture both fragile and firm. Then we'll see if forever can be rebuilt. The world mocked Clara for falling, but in the end, it was the billionaire who knelt. The story of Clara and Ethan wasn't just about reunion. It was about two worlds colliding, one gilded in power and arrogance, the other hardened by struggle and survival. For years, Clara carried her children through nights of hunger and cold, dismissed by the same voices that once claimed she would never belong. They tried to reduce her to silence, to erase her from memory, yet she endured. And endurance, though quiet, has a way of reshaping destiny. Richard wielded power like a weapon. He used money to twist records, used influence to erase truth, used arrogance to crush anyone who dared stand in his way. But arrogance burns quickly. It consumes itself when faced with the kind of strength that doesn't bend. Clara's dignity became that strength. Ethan's decision to stand by her became the mirror Richard could never face. Resilience won where cruelty failed. Love prevailed where hatred had set its trap. And the legacy that Richard sought to destroy became the one thing Ethan was finally willing to risk everything to protect. The world mocked Clara for falling, but in the end, it was the billionaire who knelt. Now I want to hear from you. Would you forgive an ex who abandoned you if they returned with everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know where you stand. And let me know what country you're watching from. It's powerful to see how far these stories reach. If you were moved by Clara's resilience, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Here we tell stories of wealth, betrayal, and redemption that hold lessons for us all. Don't miss the next one.